All right, we're officially recording. Everyone, thanks for joining us today. And again, I'm Sean Williams, the chair of the Technical Communication Information Design Program at the University of Colorado Springs. And today we have Christian Eckels, who's a UX pro with us. We're going to talk for the next hour or so about his career, his life, his hopes, his dreams. And eventually that'll find its way onto the TCID YouTube channel. And we'll hopefully weave in a lot of your questions. So Christian Eckels, thanks for joining us today. Tell us a little about who you are, how you came to UX, a little bit about your process, your pathway.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to help out. I hope I say the right things. I'm a little nervous, so don't do what I did. Maybe that should be the preface, but maybe you should. I don't know. So again, my name is Christian. I am currently a senior product designer for CNN, and I focus on CNN business, so market news and business activity, and so that includes mainstream news like Elon Musk doing things with the Twitter board and how that filters into the business cycle and how that moves the market, moves their stock. So I focus on that. CNN is under a huge redesign behind the scenes, and so I just started in October, and with a lot of other people, and we're all trying to build a smarter, interconnected experience ecosystem. So regardless of when you come into the platform, CNN.com, or on a mobile device, we're serving up content that's relevant to you and not just kind of like a general, posting of news. So and I really enjoy the work. It's really great. Very smart people on board. So I'm really excited to be there. Prior to that, COVID kind of changed the game a little bit for me. I was working as a product manager, advising UX designers and developers and engineers at a live event ticketing company. There was like a subsidiary of Ticketmaster, and that all folded with COVID. So I then kind of drifted for a bit and found clients and worked for Amazon for a bit as a UX designer, and a utility company in Boston, creating workflows to help low-income customers connect public services. So, to really learning who the user is and then developing a workflow that is understandable into like a bureaucracy back end with, Massachusetts and Connecticut and Maine. Each the utility company serviced all of New England, so each state had different requirements for what determined their need base. So I worked on that for a while. And then prior to that, I worked at NASDAQ for about 6 years, and that's where I started right out of grad school. I went to grad school in New York for design, and I stayed in New York for a while. I was there for about 10 years. And so that kind of like started the design trajectory, was in New York. So now quite a long time ago, I guess 10 years ago. So so that's like the design portion. Prior to that,
I'm going to say that's an important piece of the puzzle, right? Is your education, because most of the people who are on this call they're all undergrads, and so I think hearing that you went to grad school in design is an interesting thing as a UX designer. Mm-hmm. But before that, where were you?
Before that, I worked in a very different industry. I actually worked in the performing arts. I worked in opera. I worked at the Metropolitan Opera in New York and the Santa Fe Opera in New Mexico. In undergrad, I studied theater at a small liberal arts school in St. Louis, and quickly learned that it didn't pay. So even though I was a full-time staff member, it just doesn't. And I started building websites on the side for singers and directors and kind of PR websites, very basic. I think like it was WordPress then, and Flash, which is now no longer used. So I started building sites on the side for extra income, and then just started exploring. I did it for years and taught myself how to code. And I was doing UX design, but I didn't know what that, that wasn't a term I knew about. It was probably still a very new industry. So roundabout kind of way, I ended up meeting a head of a program in a grad school. I went to a design school in New York called Parsons, and the head of the program, probably a peer of, level-wise of Sean. Her responsibility was to go find students and recruit and, proselytize the program. And so she got me, and I change trajectory. So yeah.
I think it's interesting the connection that you make between theater and experience, because I know way back in the olden days, back in the 1990s, when UX was first being born, it wasn't called UX then either. We called it, human-centered design or something, even just web design, whatever we called it. But a lot of people still were working in theater, right? And so I interacted with a bunch of people because in theater, when you think about experience, there is an attraction and engagement and a conclusion. Right. And so there's a narrative arc in theater, and there's the same sort of logic, I think, in good experiences. And so how did that experience working in theater, how is it translated into your work as a UX designer now?
Oh yeah, that's it. That's a really great question, actually. And I think you kind of give the answer. It's the if you're zooming out of the arts, like if you're zooming out of theater, there's the narrative arc. There's taking an audience member, and this happens in film and television, taking the audience member through a journey, and to that plot peak and then resolution. So all of that applies to UX, and instead of you having like a script per se or a score, you have to write the score and you have to write the script, and you may have elements of things you need to plug into that story, but largely you are driving that story. So and if you don't do the research, if you don't do the research, and I'm using that a very vague term, that's competitive analysis and user testing and the whole gamut. If you don't do the research, that's usually when it's not a very good story. So, or maybe not good, maybe it's easily recognizable. So, like trends that are relevant, but maybe sometimes forced into UI.
Well, do you think there's anything that you wish you had learned? Because it sounds like you sort of fell into UX in a way, like a lot of us did way back in the olden days before it was sort of institutionalized like it is now. So what do you think were some things that you wish that you had known coming into your career that you didn't know?
I think that it's important to come in with the perspective that this is very much a team sport. So you, yes, are a UX designer, you're the designer making decisions, but you're working with so many different personality types and people with different motivations, and usually geared towards like a product or a project. So there's someone steering that direction. You are one of those people. Everyone is kind of steering in a direction, finding alignment between you and the developers and the engineers and your product managers, that there is a general direction that we should be going. But that said, you have to work with each of these people, and everyone has opinions on design. So you just have to accept it and synthesize it. I think that it's important to know that, like, I don't have all the answers. Like, I don't, yes, I do spend a lot more time in research and researching the user and everything, but engineers are really focused on analytical thought all day long and making things quicker and smarter and faster, and they often regularly come back to me with better ideas of how to approach something. And sometimes we take it, sometimes we don't. But I think, anyway, the moral of the story is, I think knowing this is a team sport, and when you come out of school and you start your career, if you isolate yourself that you're the designer making the right decisions, I've witnessed it is not a good career move.
That's interesting, because one of the things that we focus on in our program is the team sport, right? Every class, especially the junior and senior level classes, are all based in some way on projects that are team projects, right? And so it's good for folks to hear that, because sometimes I think especially students don't love team projects, but it's very real, right? And as an applied field, what we're trying to do is to help our students experience in the curriculum as much as they can what it's like to do the work. And so I'm happy to hear that, because it confirms what we think and what we teach in our program, in terms of collaboration, the importance of collaboration. So I'm glad to hear that. And so now let's transition a little bit to talking about, so you've gone through these educational experiences. You're in New York. you decide to get a grad degree in design, you move into UX as a career. What was surprising to you as you moved into UX?
So that, yeah, I was not used to working in corporate cultures. So that was a big transition for me. I had come from a world that was very extroverted. Everyone's extroverted and very focused on their areas. And when you go corporate, which I've always worked corporate to some extent, it's just a different game. Learning, people have different priorities. Your colleagues have different priorities, and I think it's a job. What surprised me was I needed to like learn that. Like it's not given. Like that you walk in knowing that you think everyone's on the same page, going the same direction, and that's not always the case. So you may be in the same book, but you're not on the same page. So how did I reconcile that? Was really just learning what the priorities are of your colleagues and your stakeholders, so the people who are making decisions above you. So what are their priorities? And then that helps you craft your story and your decisions and a framework that they would understand. So it's not catering to, but it is framing your decisions in a way that also matches what their goals might be. So especially with stakeholders.
I think that's an interesting point that I want to emphasize or amplify a little bit, because I know that even in my work, working as a contractor, even working in higher education, there's always the context, the business context, right? We don't ever get to decide, or we seldom get to decide that this project is going to be as I want it to be. There's always, again, you started with the team. There's always the team who has the input, but then there's always a corporate business organizational objective. Even if you're designing a small website for a local nonprofit, that local nonprofit has a set of objectives, and you can't design an experience for that nonprofit that doesn't meet their objectives. And that goes for every aspect, not just within UX, but within technical communication as a whole, is that all of us, even working as contractors, we're working for somebody who's paying the bills, and we have to meet their needs too.
Yeah, you do. And at the same time, you have to be the designer. You have to make the decisions. You have to advocate. So I want to make sure that the point doesn't come across that you become like a short order chef. Like if your stakeholder says do A, you do A. No, like that intellectually isn't going to get you very far. You have to challenge some bad ideas, or you have to, but you have to do it in a way that is like graceful.
Give us an example of when you had one of these challenges where somebody came to you and said, I would really like to have, blinking, dancing ants on my website.
Sure.
And you said, no, that's not going to work. How'd you get around
that? It just happened like 2 weeks ago, I would say. So over in CNN business, we're focusing on a new user. Let me backtrack. The current user is they say aging out. So that's the term that is used to define an older generation that's becoming less engaged with the product. And that is over 65, affluent, predominantly male. We're going on for a very different crowd that I was brought on board to design. That is 30 to 50, primarily female. And we titled that the emerging novice investor. It's very much who I am as an investor. So interested in the markets, interested in investments, very cautious, doesn't really quite know where to start. Even though I've been working in this for years, I don't know where to start. So that's who we collectively over the, before I started, that's who we've defined who the user group is that we're going to try to attract, the segment. So my recent superior, stakeholders that were brought on board recently came from very investment banking firms that are very advanced. So one called BlackRock and Morningstar, and it's a very it's like traders on Wall Street use these things. There's a platform called the Bloomberg Terminal. It's very complicated. It's very risky investments and how to view analytics. And so my stakeholders come from that world, and I come from the blunderbuss of my world. And I, recently heard in meetings, we're looking at mock-ups that our stakeholders created, and I had to call it, like, I don't think this is who our, I'm showing my mock-ups, which are completely different from content perspective. And I thought I just have to remind people, like, do we have the agreed perspective that our user base is the emerging novice investor, and what we're seeing here with how to short stock and how to read various analytics, does that meet our users' needs? And I would argue no. So based on blah, 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 blah. So that recently happened. You just have to like remind people. It's very easy to get, especially since we all work remote now, it's very easy to go silo. And if I came from one of these fancy places like BlackRock or, and I created Bloomberg Terminal, I would probably have that mindset as well.
So do you have to balance then, or what is the balance between sort of your own design sense and intuition and following conventions or pre-formulated patterns or even style guides that CNN has given to you?
Yes, and I do that by learning as much as I can about what I don't understand. So especially in finance, there's a lot of metrics that I don't understand. And when I start seeing those creep into the platform, I go and research them and question if they need to be questioned. But I think what's important is that we're developing a system that we can test and measure. So I want to say it's not wise to come in saying we don't need this on the interface because our user's not going to use this. I think it's better to say, can we test this? Can we either do preliminary testing before we build it? Can we get feedback? Or if we do build it, can we A/B test it and define our audience and define if it's needed? Because I don't have the answer. And also, we're going off the audience. We even know it's there. So we're hoping they're there. But yeah, so moral of the story is, how do I balance that? I balance that in a way of like making sure that I understand what the interface is showing. I understand our user, but I define how can we build it some way that's smart to get feedback.
Do you have a sort of a standardized process that you follow? Because in our program, we talk a lot about processes, user-centered design processes and project management processes and all of these things. And so do you have sort of like a 9-step template that you roughly follow, or is it just different every time and you make it up?
No, well, because I'm new, there's a lot of making it up right now. But actually, just this past month, I have taken charge of developing a methodology that is scalable with my stakeholders. So, moving forward, actually starting next week, we're going to meet with users every week. So we have a group of 900 people who volunteer to be our testers, and then from that we vet out who we think our user base, and that limits it down to 300 or 400 people. And once a week on Friday, at least 2 people meet, show mockups, come in with a structured conversation, get feedback. It could be wireframes, it could be mockups. So we're starting that because before that, there's so much shooting in the dark. So the methodology is design, meet the requirements, show it to users, gather feedback, build an argument if you have to have an argument for changing course. And that is in parallel with designing out decisions that have already been made, and then working with developers and getting that built. So the process is, I am backtracking. So sketch, show with your product manager, mock up, use wireframes. I take it from low fidelity to high fidelity. Build out those mockups. Those mockups are usually what you take to users for user testing now, moving forward every Friday. And then validating to some extent, or deciding what components still have unknown decisions around them, and can we build it in a way that can be verified? And then moving forward with development. But also in parallel with that, we have a research team, and I work with them in defining, right now we're doing user interviews with people use Robinhood. Why do you use the Robinhood app, the investing app? Why do you use Robinhood? What stories are you looking for? Just outside of the actual investing function, what as a product, what attracts you? So we're running a campaign in parallel to that. So there's, it's kind of a stacked approach, and all things are moving forward at the same time. So I touch base on all those throughout the day.
And so your main job then is as a designer more than as the researcher. And so you're interpreting or synthesizing research findings and then making a recommendation or designing some sort of thing, interaction or function based upon the recommendations that the UX researchers, the user researchers have given to you.
Yeah, correct. I vetted a script with a researcher, UX researcher, and she's moving forward to that script. I attend most of the sessions, the interview sessions, as an observer. I don't synthesize the work that she will, or a researcher will synthesize. I mean, they take that and then synthesize it myself. Like, what did I learn, or contradict? But I like to leave space. Like, they have their own job and they have their own lens that they need to see this through. So, yeah. And then to answer your question, so I'm part of the research, but I'm not like in the trenches of research.
Right. And so what is a day in in your life look like?
So I live in LA, but I work East Coast hours. So most of my colleagues are in New York or scattered throughout the East Coast. I have a morning stand-up every day at 7 a.m. Stand-up is where you meet with your immediate team and you discuss what you did the previous day, what you're working on today, and if there are any blocks, any questions that need to get answered. So there's that. That's a 20-minute call, 20 to 30-minute call. Sometimes that rolls over into other questions. So, and then about 8 a.m., I usually have like a little bit of break and I work, and then I start going into meetings with researchers. I meet with my product manager to review sketches that I worked on, sketches or prototypes I had been working on, advancing towards getting to that user test on Fridays. So that's pretty much the day. But then on top of that, throughout the week are, I don't know if you teach Agile, like any of the principles of Agile. Okay. There are all these other meetings that happen with developers that like take place, that there's like sprint planning and whatever the developer is going to work on. And these are, 2-hour meetings. You have to vet those. You have to vet the content that goes into those meetings. You have to have that meeting. And then there's a retrospective of that meeting. There's a lot of meetings. So all the developer meetings happen in tandem with that. So that gets scattered throughout the week. And then on top of that, I meet with my stakeholders, my manager, my my immediate manager, and then that person's manager, the VP of digital. So like once a week, once every 2 weeks.
Right. And so contrary to what an image might be, you don't just have your head down designing cool stuff all the time.
No. You get I get slivers, 8 to 10, 2 to 3, my time, or Pacific time, and then I'll work till 3 or 4. Also, I do a side gig as well, so I work on that in the late afternoons. So yeah.
Well, I'm curious to hear about your best day ever, whether in your current job or just like in the last 10 years, the best day at work. What did that look like?
I think, I don't want to be altruistic, but it was really the utility company. I really enjoyed the work I was doing, learning that user base. And I was doing it from here, which is a little weird, me with all these people from scattered throughout Massachusetts and Vermont, and then learning designing their workflows and interfaces, and then getting that validated, like this is the right path. We are going to spend public funds to build this system. And yeah, so I think so to be altruistic, it was really kind of helping a group that really needed it. So like the current portals were really quite dated. So yeah, I wanted, like, that's in recent memory. So if the biggest takeaway is like launching systems that are, you validate your decisions or the decisions collectively that have been made. It's not, again, team sport. So yeah.
And so what I'm hearing you say then is something like what makes that particular job really, really rewarding is that you were doing something that had a purpose.
Yes.
Beyond just not to diss CNN, which is a great company, but that had a real purpose that was helping people doing some good in the world.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm finding more like little glimpses of that, and I do some side teaching and side mentoring, and I'm finding more of like kind of that feeling of like, okay, well, yeah, I guess it's helping. Yeah, it is helping someone. I don't want to sound like a saint, because definitely not. But yeah, I think that's a good way to frame it.
Well, and then there's the flip side. What's a really awful day look like for you?
That is,
and you don't have to use any personal names or any names
question.
of companies.
Now, this has to do more about like company culture, and I think it's important to be mindful of situations that you're in, toxic environments. It happens in corporate often. It can, I don't know anymore, but it did then. Especially my time in NASDAQ. It's going online. Sorry, guys. The worst day, it was stretched out a couple of years. Yeah, it can, your environment that you work in, you both contribute towards, and you have impact to change. And if you don't, within reason, if you don't actively help contribute towards the environment that you want to work in, as a collective, it defines itself. And if you let that happen and it doesn't work for you, it's very hard to work in.
And so, we don't do a lot of work in our program on, sort of organizational culture. When I worked with grad students, we did a lot of work with corporate culture and organizational culture because it really is key. And I think for the folks who are on this call and who might be watching in the future, this is a really important piece of the pie, right? Mm-hmm. When I talk with students, a lot of times when we talk, it's like, should I take this job? What about this job? And I always ask them, it's like, what does your gut say? You went in and you talk to these people. Does it fit? Does it feel right? There's the benefits and there's the pay and there's, how much it contributes or aligns with your personal values. Like there are certain types of companies that I just wouldn't work with, right? Mm-hmm. Because they don't align with my values personally. But beyond that, there is a lot of value in just having cool people to work with.
Yes.
And just liking the people you work with. And, we don't spend enough time, I don't think, in helping students think about their career choices on that, right? We talk about, you have to have this skill set, or you have to have this, you have to know how to use Figma or whatever. Mm-hmm. But, liking the people you work with is really important.
Yeah, it is. And also and to expand from that, not every company is a good match for you. I do notice with younger people I tend to work with, there's like an extreme draw to want to work at like a TikTok or a Meta, Instagram, one of those. And then if they do go and they don't enjoy it, like wasn't a good fit going in. So like just putting the expectation on yourself that you have to work at these like huge brand names is can be dangerous. So, I mean, I'm very lucky, thank God, that, it is a big name, but I work in a little tiny bubble in the big name. So, but I've worked in big names that are just not great to work in. So
I once did a big project with a company from Redmond and Microsoft. And this was actually when I was living in the Carolinas. And it was so cool on one hand to go up to the Microsoft campus in Charlotte, because all the things that we imagine, the big tech company, there's like the sleeping pods, and there's the break room with the Coke machine, and they had beer and free sandwiches and subsidized kale salads and all this stuff.
Right. Yeah.
And it was all very lovely, but one of the things that you realize why they have all that stuff there and why it's stocked with Mountain Dew is to keep people there working all the time.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so it's sort of diabolical in a way, like with, I did a project with Adobe once, and it was the same thing. I mean, it's so awesome. But then there's this weird dark side of working with a big company are those companies, at least in my experience, because the pressure was extraordinary all the time, all the time.
Definitely, and that is good to call it the free meals and the relaxed aesthetic is to keep you there, especially in Silicon Valley. There's a lot of buses that will, they'll go from like Cupertino or from or Google's campus, into San Francisco, pick up people and take them back. And the bus is like a moving city. It's like Wi-Fi and coffee shop, and it's so you can work the entire time from like 6:30 in the morning when you get on the bus until you go home at like 7 or 8 p.m. So yeah, it's a double-edged sword. Yeah, you do get free coffee, but you lose your sanity too. So
right. Right. And I did have one student once who went to work for Adobe in San Jose. I guess she was in San Jose. And she decided that she was going to do that for 5 years. And she's like, I'm going to go and I'm going to live in that life for 5 years, because then once I've done my 5 years at Adobe, I can go anywhere in the world, any other company. Now she's working for a small startup. So, so it does have its advantages too, to have Adobe or Microsoft or Meta on your resume. But let me ask you this question. What's your favorite aspect of your job?
Oh yeah. I think it's often designers will, share like working for the user and those same things. And I think that there's definitely an element to that in my answer, but it's more about working with people. I'm very much a people person. So like introvert, extrovert, introverted, extrovert. So it's always, I usually say at work because of the people. So are they, driven individuals, and can define a North Star and know an industry tech, we'll say tech as an industry, outside of like their little domain, like outside of design, outside of engineering, iOS development, whatever. They understand the impact of analytics. They understand the impact of blockchain, and now VR is kind of on a launch pad, but NFTs, blah blah blah. Do they understand the industry? Are they engaged with it? So morally, what do I enjoy about it? I enjoy working with people who are intellectually driven to make better products to help people's lives be easier to some extent. Now, I'm working for a news giant, so we're serving up content and ads, so that's not. But how are you doing that? Are we serving up the relevant information when you come to the page? Are we helping if you are a new investor or you want to be an investor? Are we helping serve up contextual education that matches you because we identified you as a new person? Yeah. So moral of the story is, like I said, working with people.
Well, and digging a little bit deeper, thinking about what you do, like sort of on a daily basis and so on. What kind of tools are you using? What sort of technologies do you use on a daily basis in your job?
So Figma, obviously, a lot of time in Figma. So, but I have to say though that like I think it's important, especially for students, to know that like the tools change very fast. So 4 years ago was a program, or 5 years ago was a program called Sketch. So, and in 5 years, Figma may be out the door and maybe something else. So, I say this now, and who knows, 3 weeks we'll adopt a new platform. So there's a lot of Figma. There's a lot of internal research tools that I use, that white papers. So white papers are kind of a focused paper, academic paper on a subject. So what other tools do I use? A lot of testing tools, a lot of products that put prototypes on my phone so I can see what it looks like, or my tablet device. Yeah, I wish I had a better answer for you, but it's a lot of Figma.
Yeah, I keep hearing Figma. I used to, 2-3 years ago, I heard a lot of Sketch, and now it's like, yeah, Figma, and some of our students will get some exposure to that, some won't. And one thing I'm curious to hear your opinion about, and maybe we can come back to this a little bit in the future part of our conversation, but you mentioned increasingly virtual or augmented reality. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that, because it's something that we're beginning to think about a little bit, on the academic side. It's like, what does this mean for us? What does this mean for our curricula, and what classes we teach? So talk a little bit about that and what you think it's going.
Oh, yeah. This is based off of, what I observe. So I wish I could point to something a little bit more intelligent, but I think that there will be a race coming to own between the leaders and that are driving that conversation, maybe Google, Apple, Meta, to have ownership of the product, to design a product that has mass appeal. Because if you can own the product, you can control the conversation, and what goes into the product and what goes out of the product. Case in point, Apple gets to decide what apps are on their app store. They get to drive the conversation. If they want to decide, give the user the ability to control their privacy settings, and that will impact everyone across the App Store ecosystem, including Facebook, so be it. So if you can design a platform that you control the profit mechanism, then I think that's the first answer, is these companies are going to be in a race to get to either an augmented reality or virtual reality product that isn't a brick on your face, and isn't, also people want to wear. I remember Google, the Glass from years ago, people didn't want to wear that. So I think people are in a race to that. How does it impact education? It's hard for me to see past the gimmick right now. So I know there are apps in VR. I have an Oculus, and there are apps in Oculus that you can meet with your colleagues and have these meetings, or there's these virtual chat rooms, but the whole conversation is about being in a virtual chat room. So there's nothing happening. So I can't imagine getting on this thing with colleagues and having a conversation other than about the fact we're all cartoon characters. So how does it impact education? I don't know if it will impact it that way, in a collaborative way. We're all sitting as cartoon characters in a room, but I think it may, impact, if you want to, from an academic point of view, have a shared experience that isn't cartoon characters. Perhaps it's a interactive art piece, or and you want to convey that experience to your students. I think that there's space for that. That's very vague to say.
No, I have sort of a funny story about this. Going back all the way to 2007, I had a large National Science Foundation grant, and maybe you remember something called Second Life.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, right. One of the early virtual worlds, and there, I had this large grant, and we were studying information architecture in Second Life and how to use it for instrumental purposes. Right. Mm-hmm. Second Life, for those of you out there who don't know, it was one of the early three-dimensional virtual worlds where you could build avatars, and you could build, not physical spaces, but you could build, a town, and you could walk through a town and so on. And I was in a meeting with my group. This is getting to your conversation, or your comment about talking about being in the meeting, the virtual meeting. So I was in this meeting, and we all had little avatars, and we were sitting on virtual beanbags, all of our little avatars or something. And the way that this system worked is it had sound that would be left, right, depending upon where the person was in relationship to you.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And so there was a person who was speaking and came in through my right earphone, and so I turned my avatar to listen to that person, to look at that person's face, and their avatar was right here.
Yeah.
And I physically moved back from my computer screen, and it was very, very weird. And that's interesting because in 2007 we were asking these questions: what is the role of this three-dimensional stuff and augmented reality? And then it just disappeared. Right? Yeah. It disappeared for 10 years or 12 years, and now it's kind of coming back. And I'll be interested to see more concepts that are a little bit more augmented than virtual, things like machine learning. Mm-hmm. And how machine learning can guide chat bots, for example. And so I'm mentioning these things partly because for our students out there in the world, when you are interviewing, these are things that might come up, right? As the people who are supposedly the best and the brightest and the youngest with the newest, coolest toys, we have to start thinking about these things, and they're complicated. And I don't know what the answers are, but they're not going away. The fact that Facebook Meta is now in this world, it's not going away. Second Life was like this little startup, but the big boys are playing in it now.
Yeah. If I had to put cash on the table, I think augmented reality will have a larger impact than virtual reality. But yeah, it's just more accessible.
So. I agree with that. So let's transition a little bit to talk a little bit about the future, because we're already talking about augmented reality. And a couple of questions here. And so, you know, what is the future outside of augmented reality, virtual reality? You know, what do you think are the things that are the trends that are following an evolutionary path that you know, if you look backwards and you put 1 + 2 + 3 together, now we're here, and you follow that same pattern out. What do you see going forward?
We have to edit this part out. I can't remember the book. There's a book that just came out that I just started reading called Stolen Attention. I'll have to look it up. But I'm not pessimistic. But and I'm not gonna answer your question immediately directly, but I do think there will be a impact on all the screen time and all the attention that's being pulled, how our attention gets pulled between alerts and notifications and Instagram and TikTok and blah, 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 and all these things. So I'm concerned about our attention and how it gets pulled in all kinds of directions, and how that impacts how we enjoy physical space. So what I would hope to see is that digital space, like there's collective, it sounds like a cult now, we collectively recognize this always on your phone, always scrolling, doom scrolling, is having a negative impact on the quality of our life. So I would hope that the future that tech will support what our physical existence is. And I think some of that could be through augmented reality. You could still have bits of that digital experience, but it's not quite as distracting. So yeah, that's what I hope. What do I see happening? I know to what degree you have taught or had conversation around Web 3.0. I know that's very popular, and decentralized ownership of your data. I think there'll be more conversations about that. So instead of you logging in to various platforms using your Facebook login or your Google login, you'll own that component, that your data, and you share it through an encrypted key to a third party to log in. I think there'll be a lot more of that coming. Whoever owns that product, there's another question now, they have centralized ownership of your data, but whatever, regardless. So I think data ownership that conversation is going to be evolving in the future. I also think that from a business world, I think there'll be a lot more products and discussion and focus, aka money, going into smart contracts, blockchain. So being able to have ownership and verified ownership over a contract. So you sign a contract with something that lives forever on a blockchain now. I think there'll be a lot more around that, but man, I wish I had a better answer. I would have come prepared with that one.
No, it's a hard question, and you know, I think one of the major things that I think about right now is really just the impact of COVID, right? I think in the next, we're in the next 2 years, we're going to figure out what that means. And I really like your comment about the virtual supporting the physical, or the interaction of the two. And I think there are positives and negatives that we really have learned from COVID. One of the positives is that we have these great technologies like Zoom and Teams, and these products were underdeveloped and underutilized 3 years ago. And now they're really effective platforms, and we know how to use them to connect, and so on Christmas Day, for the first time ever, my parents, who are 80, did a video call. They hated every second of it, and they couldn't figure out. And it was like a comedy sketch, because they were yelling at each other, these two 80-year-old people, because there was feedback, because they both had to be on a computer. It's like, get on the same computer. And so it was very funny. But so there's a positive side of the technologies, but I do worry about the negative as well. And I'm optimistic in a way because I see people who are, 20. We'll just put that number out there, increasingly dissociating from or canceling their social media accounts and spending time doing more real or physical things. And, and so I'm optimistic about that, I think. And, and the question for us as user experience people is what does that mean for the technological products that we create? And then that's where, some of the VR, AR stuff kind of comes in. But it is an interesting problem.
Yeah. That book I was mentioning is Johan Hari, Stolen Focus. Just FYI, in case anyone wants to read about any of this. Yeah, the COVID, FaceTime and Zoom and Skype, not Skype, but Zoom, these virtual meetings. I think it brought us closer together. I can only speak personally. I'm from Colorado. I'm from Colorado Springs, guys. I am checking with my family every day on FaceTime with my family in Colorado Springs or on the Western Slope. So, and it's really helped me not feel so isolated by not being there. I'm there all the time virtually, which is a little hokey, but it doesn't feel hokey. So, yeah.
Well, what about your future? What's next for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm more and more compelled about what's happening in the industry, like everything I just said about attention and AR and VR and blockchain and blah, 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 all the things. I'm really engaged in what's happening in that space. And I've always been engaged, which I think is what attracted me to the business, to the industry. But I would probably like to see myself going more an academic route, teaching route. I find a little bit more fulfillment in that. It's kind of fun to see someone's career start to, or like work with them from the beginning of career to off the launch pad. So I'm enjoying that. So I could see more of that, and maybe tightening up that, I think there's like a methodology to help young designers get a career going, and I'm still trying to figure out what my methodology is to that. So, or that rubric. So I see more of that. So yeah, that's I would say probably the immediate trajectory. And then where CNN falls in that, I don't, things change so fast. I don't know. It's so I enjoy it for now, and it's here for now, and I can't say I'll be there for 10 years because who knows if it'll be there for 10 years. So yeah.
Well, and I think it's interesting also to think about learning and learner-centered design, or now learner experience design, it's called, back in the olden days. And showing my age, it was one of these things where it was then called learner-centered design, late 1990s, and morphed into instructional technology, and now it's learner experience design. And when I think about classes, when I'm doing it well, and I'm really conscientious and intentional about it, every single class is an experience. And I'm not as intentional about that, and I don't have as much time as I'd like to all the time to design the courses that way or design a class that way. But there's a lot of intersection, I think, between experience design and teaching, because every class, has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I think for people who are interested in UX, especially, understanding that narrative arc, understanding the journey is incredibly important as a concept. There's, you can use Figma or Sketch or whatever. But, understanding that story and how a particular technology participates in a story, participates in a journey of a particular user going from A to B to C. I think that's a fundamental skill, and we often forget about it. But so classes is the same way.
Yeah. To dovetail to that, I just want to mention, I wrote down this quote the other day that I was going to share. You don't live in the world you were born into, and I think that applies especially with academia. Like right now, we're talking about Figma, and we're not going to be talking about it in 5 years, most likely. So, you can't grab onto, you cannot hold tight onto any of this. So, it's really important what's happening, but the tides change very quickly. So.
That's a great segue into the last question, and it kind of is already an answer. And that is, what is the your advice for students looking forward, going ahead.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I think is to recognize when you are becoming stagnant. That doesn't mean bad. It just means like when you are becoming set in your ways as a professional in technology, removing your personal life from that. And that, I mean, these are different layers of things, but professionally, you like, you have to evolve with the tools, and you have to evolve with the culture all the time. 2 years ago, we were not talking about NFTs, and today we are talking about NFTs. We're not. You have to know what it is, and not in a context of like, what is a Bored Ape? What, if it, maybe some of your students know, like buying these NFTs. It's more about what is that technology and how can it apply to what I'm doing now, or how may it apply. You may or may not use it, but so my advice would be to like stay intellectually curious of what's happening in the industry, as well as like culture, and especially culture, what's happening in culture. I think those are the two areas that I think don't go stagnant, know what's happening in the industry and know what's happening in culture.
That's good, because one of the things that I hope that our students take away, or one of the skills I hope that they develop, is becoming lifetime learners, because that's a key skill, especially in a field like this one. Because I like to tell the story of my career path. I mean, I started in this world when we were actually using knives to make type curved, right? When we literally cut and pasted things, and we obviously don't do that anymore. And had I continued to cut and paste, I wouldn't have a job anymore, right? And so the arc even of my own professional journey, going from cut and paste with a knife and glue and wax to using digital tools that we use now, sometimes it's very painful. Learning is hard, right? Mm-hmm. But it's absolutely essential. And I think it's not even just essential for the career. I think it's just as a life lesson. I think that's essential. Continue to learn, because that's how you stay young. Yeah. I think that's how you stay alive and active.
Yeah. And when you're not so young, it's important. I'm going to dovetail onto that. I'm going to add to that. It's also really important to take care of yourself and know when to turn off the screen and sleep and don't party. And it's really like when you're in your 20s, I think it's easy to gravitate towards like the limelight. But know when it's time to turn it off and like focus on yourself. I have noticed when I take better care of myself, I'm a better designer as a practitioner. So yeah, it's easier to come up with ideas. It's easier to have conversations and not get defensive. So that's like, I'm talking to the students. It's like everything we just said, like that's like chapter 1 and chapter 2 is like, you have to take care of yourself. So yeah.
That's a great way to end. Take care of yourselves, learn, take care of yourselves, because those are just key life lessons. Yeah. And one of the things that we don't spend enough time on in education is just saying, sometimes good enough is good enough. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Put it away. Yeah. Yeah. And that is a key skill to learn. We don't want people to slack, but mm-hmm. at the same time, we don't want people to burn out. We want people to be happy, healthy, well, mm-hmm. and enjoy life.
Yeah. Because you don't want to be up at 2 a.m.
It's a job. It's a job, right? And it's part of the job. It's part of our life, and it's an important part of our lives. But at the end of the day, it's just a part.
Yeah.
It isn't.
You don't want to be up at 2 a.m. scrolling through TikTok. Like, go to bed.
Go to bed, right? Kim Kardashian will be there tomorrow.
Yes.
Or whoever. I don't even know. I don't even have a TikTok account.
Yeah.
Christian Eckels, thank you so much.
Yeah, that's great.
For chatting with us today. And I didn't see any questions in the chat, so I'm guessing that the students didn't have any. And I hope that you are open to students contacting me if they have a question. I can share your contact information with them. Mm-hmm. So again, thank you very much, and thanks to all of you out there in Cyberland who joined us today. I hope you found it wonderful and enlightening. Christian Eckels, UX professional at CNN currently. Thank you.
All right. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.
Take care. Bye.